Hi there. I am back with another stream. It's been a while. I think the last Paintover stream was actually the last stream I ever did. So yeah, it's good to be back. Life has been just a little bit busy and crazy, and been doing a lot of art and not sharing it, at least not sharing the process. So yeah, but I thought I'd get back to it today and do some Paintovers. So we had a bunch more submissions to my Discord's challenge. This theme for this one was ancient, which I thought was kind of a fun theme. And yeah, so I'm just going to dive into these pieces, do some quick paintovers, and then I'll announce a winner. So yeah, let me switch over here and just hop in. So yeah, I really like this one. I think it's really nice. I love the stuff happening with the colors. I think the biggest thing is probably perspective. I think that's probably the issue because in some ways the perspective's working great, and in other ways it's not working quite as great. And I think it has to do kind of with um, kind of focal lengths. So if you look at just like the middle of the painting, it works quite nicely. But I feel like you're kind of going for a little bit of distortion here on the outsides. Like you've got, for instance, buildings on the outsides that are kind of tilted in. Um, so it feels like you're trying to go for kind of fisheye, but also kind of formal, like strict, like telephoto kind of look at the same time, which can work if you can get away with it. But I think in this case is maybe what's throwing me off a little bit. So I think part of that is actually like perspective on kind of the top here. I feel like we wouldn't see very much of the top of any of these leaves for this tree. I think we'd be mostly looking up at everything up here, more so than what you've got. So I think I'd probably try to throw a little bit more underside on these shapes than what you've got. Like I really like the shapes. I think they have some nice form to them. But yeah, I feel like it's not quite receding correctly up there. And it's kind of weird that we're looking sort of at the top of too many of these. And so I want to see a little bit less of that, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's for that. And then the foreground is mostly working. I kind of like it. I'm not sure if I'm sold on the stairs kind of leading to nowhere. I kind of wish I could see like a little bit of where they're leading to. Maybe a little bit of a platform here so that we could actually see like what's at the bottom of this. I feel like stairs kind of leading off the bottom. I don't know. Maybe it's a personal preference thing, but I'm not sure if it's working for me. And then for these buildings on the bottom, I guess kind of what you were going for was like a 3-point perspective of them pointing up, and that kind of works. But I guess it feels weird because we're not getting enough of that 3-point in other things. Like I'm not seeing a distinct 3-point in the rest of the architecture. So I'm just kind of seeing it a little bit there. And I almost wonder about tilting them the other way. That is like kind of make them more almost like a fisheye effect here of let them be in the corner, but let them actually like tilt the other way and almost curve a little bit. Like the way you would in like a fisheye lens, and then like have it off to the side. But yeah, that would be at least a thought of something to do there. But really for a scene this complicated, I think the only way to get it all just right and feeling cohesive and mixing natural with architectural elements is going to be like just 3D modeling things. So if you don't feel like doing that, it's an absolute pain. Another thing that I was going to mention here quickly is I think the values are getting a little too contrasty here in the center. I don't think they're working quite with the the atmosphere you've got. I think they just get a little bit too contrasty. And we don't really need that much contrast there. Like, we're going to look there. It's in the middle. It's got to figure there's stuff going on. We're going to look there no matter what. And so I think you could actually knock back some of the contrast there and add in a bit more of the atmosphere you've got going on here, because I like the feel of the atmosphere, and I'd like to see a little bit more of that. Another thing I like to do, just kind of in general, is that sometimes on these like bloom effects, if you aren't careful, they can get kind of washed out looking. So all I have to do is go back in and add in like a little bit of orangey colors and reddish colors, so that they don't look quite so washed out. And I try to do this pretty subtly when I do it, but just because of how like digital blending technologies work, it tends to let things go kind of gray and muddy rather than nice and warm and glowing. I wish there was a way to just like tweak that so that you can get like nice warm glow, but yeah. So I think I would shoot for a little bit more, just because that's kind of what you're showing us off like everywhere else in the landscape. And so I might try to get a little bit more of that nice orangey glow throughout here. But I really love, for one thing, these like purple and orange and red colors going on back here in this clouds. I really love it. It's super awesome. So yeah, just a few random things. Overall, I really like this piece. I think it's really well done. You did a great job, and I know you worked really hard on it. But yeah, just a few tweaks to at least keep in mind for the next piece. But I think, yeah, really nice overall. Let's see here. All right, this is cool. I like this a lot. I think the initial thing that hits me is I'm not getting a sense of scale. Like, I'm pretty sure you want to go pretty big. I'm pretty sure these guys are not supposed to be miniature people. So I think it's something you might want to work on here is scale. One thing that I think I would do, there's going to be a few things, but let me see here. Oh, the screen is slightly cropped. Let me see if I can just tweak that real quick. You are quite right. I just move you up there. All right, cool. Now you can see the bottom of the piece. Thank you. Yeah, so I think the thing's going to be a few different tweaks on scale here. So the first thing I would actually suggest is repeating some of these things into the foreground so that we get a greater sense of the depth here. So repetition is one of the kind of first building blocks of getting depth into a piece. So I would actually add some more of these floating platform rock things coming at us into the foreground, because then we start to get a sense immediately that, oh wow, these are pretty far away, because we can see them right up close to us. So we get that sense of like diminishing scale back here immediately. The next thing is going to be a little bit of atmospheric perspective. Right now, if you go grayscale on this, I don't get an immediate sense of atmosphere. This is something I suggest everyone do, is just switch your pieces to grayscale regularly. The way you do it is just do a color proofing mode in Photoshop. It's super easy. It lets you basically use Control Y to switch it to grayscale, and boom, you get to check your paintings for values. And so in this case, I think that there's a little bit too much contrast going on in the background. And even for the smaller figures here, it feels like there's just too much contrast for how far away they are from where we're at. So let's see if we can do a few things to work on that. Let's see here. So I'm going to go ahead and lighten some things. And I'll be able to selectively bring back a little bit of contrast. It's going to look a little bit too washed out for a minute here, but I should be able to bring back some of that. I just want to get the depth and atmosphere first. And this is something I'll have to do to my own paintings sometimes when I notice that they're just feeling a bit too flat and like they don't have enough going on in terms of the depth. I'll actually just do this exact same process and come in here with an airbrush and start just pushing things back a bit. So already that starts to immediately get that sense of depth. And when you turn it to grayscale, it's even more obvious of, oh wow, that stuff was really contrasty before. And now we've kind of pushed it back to where it needs to be. So with that said, let's see here. There's also a few like just linear perspective issues. I feel like the mouth of this kind of cave hole thing doesn't quite work in a few places, and so I might suggest taking a closer look at that. The lighting is a little inconsistent, as in it feels like, I guess you're kind of going for a backlit scene, but in that case we're not going to get quite so much front light, and you're going to get a little bit less light on some of the clouds than you've got now. I also don't feel like you really need the outlines on this figure. I feel like you can do everything you need to do with silhouette. I'm not opposed to outlines. I just don't think they're really doing much for you here. So the key to getting something to stand out is just putting a dark value against a light value, and then light values against dark values, and then you've immediately got forms that start to read. You can start to tell where shapes are and stuff. So I'm just going to actually simplify all this down. I also don't know about having it this blue of blue. I feel like some more grays introduced into this blue is going to make the vibrancy of the blue work a bit better. Sometimes just too much saturation can just feel kind of overwhelming, I guess. And yeah, I feel like the blue is a little too isolated in there and a little too extreme. All right. And then I think once we get to this point, then we can start to figure out like how to reintroduce a little bit of contrast in places. Because I think you can go a bit more extreme and just start to push very subtly with your values. You don't have to go crazy, crazy contrasty to have quite a lot of effect in pieces like this. When you're dealing with trying to convey scale, sticking to a tight value scheme is really important. And you can do a whole lot of painting, a lot of rendering, a lot of implying detail in very, very, very tight value ranges. And that's kind of what you want to be going for here, is those really tight value ranges. I might not do it now, but I would consider the lighting on the kind of the gold pieces here, and whether I want to stick to having them sort of front lit like they are, or whether adding something else. I think it can work. Again, lighting doesn't have to be 100% accurate to be acceptable. Like it can look pretty cool, and that's kind of all that matters sometimes. It doesn't have to be super, super accurate. So just flipping, I suddenly see this mountain hill thing over here sticking out, so I'm just going to knock that back. It's just drawing too much attention where I don't really need attention. And then you've still got a fair bit of value range that you can use on these clouds back here. Like you're pretty far away from white on any of this. And so I feel like you can use the rest of that value range to good effect, both by adding some rim light onto the main figure here, as well as a little bit on the clouds behind them. And that'll help them pop out even more. All right, I think that's about as far as I'll go with that. But now we can see when we turn it to grayscale that it holds together much better. It's a lot more obvious shapes, obvious depth, obvious scale going on, and that's really what we're shooting for here. So you can kind of see the before and after there. So obviously I obliterate a lot of the detail and the rendering and stuff like that you've got, but that sort of stuff is always subservient to the overall impact of the image, and that's what we want to be going for. So I'll do this to my images too, because I'll get overly rendered and too contrasty in areas that it doesn't matter, and so I'll have to just knock everything back and readjust. And this is the kind of stuff that I'll do to my own pieces. So just a few thoughts, and I hope it helps. All right. This is cool. I really like this. This is really nicely done. Let me see here. So there's going to be a few things that I'm going to suggest. First of all, the colors don't quite feel like they're working to me. And the reason is that you've got really pale white light right here on this statue, and for some reason Control Z is not working. There we go. And then you've got really warm light over here, and clearly based on the sunset you have warm light hitting everything, but it's not quite reflecting in the colors here. The thing about a warm light is it's going to make everything warm no matter what the local color is. And so I think that would be the first thing that calls out to me of something didn't feel quite like it was meshing here. There was something that felt a little bit out of place. And so whenever I have something like that, I immediately start to figure out, okay, how is this not quite working? And in this case, I think it's the color, the lighting is not quite working, because the blue lighting is working great. I think the blue lighting is really cool. I really like what it adds. I like this warm, cool contrast, always a good thing. But I'd like to see a little bit more of this warmth brought into the light over here. And immediately after we start doing this, we're going to notice that this thing's going to feel like it belongs a bit better. It doesn't even take that much before we start to see, oh yeah, now it's warm, and now it feels like this setting sun is really hitting this thing. And I'm going to add just kind of a little bit more over here, not for any specific reason other than I think compositionally I just want to have some stuff over here because it's a large area of just not much going on. So for the sake of that, I'm just going to add in some vague brushstrokes that imply there's something going on back here. And so even just from that little bit of warmth I've added here, it starts to feel like it belongs just a bit better. It's still a little bit out of place, because I guess where some of that lighting is coming from is from the sky, but it's too directional to feel like the sky. Yeah, so I guess that's it. The other thing is that I want to see a little bit of the fade of light. So obviously at sunset, so as the sun dips, it's going to hit the top of really large things and not usually the bottom, because you're going to start getting mountains and stuff like that that are obstructing the view of that, or even just it dipping below the horizon is going to be enough to start casting some stuff into shadow. So I think it would kind of make sense and also just be a really cool effect. And a great way to add some more depth is to start adding some shadows onto this mountain back here. So let's just try adding a couple kind of cool shadows back here, and let some of the more of this sort of dip into darkness back here. And this is something you'll see a lot of in really good like Hudson River School landscape paintings, is this like banding of values of light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And it's a super popular trick because it just adds a ton of depth to a landscape. And you start to get this wonderful depth to it. So just by adding a few of these shadows. And then the other thing that you tend to get is a little bit of like a warm, cool transition, where the things at the top are going to be usually a little bit oranger, and they kind of shift towards a little bit redder at the bottom. And that is also just it's going to make it feel just a little bit more like the sunset lighting you're going for here. So it's going to be very subtle, and I'm just going to do a few hits of it here and there, but going to drop that down to a little bit warmer in a few spots. And then at the top, going to punch up the contrast and the saturation just a little bit. This is having painted many of these sort of scenes before, and kind of what looks cool. And this is something that just, it always looks cool. So you don't necessarily have to do this, but I just think it looks really sweet and just makes it a little bit punchier back there. And same goes for this guy. I think you could start doing that to him. I don't know that his legs need to be lit at all. In fact, I don't think they're really doing a lot for me. Like, we kind of want him to look up here, which I like the glowing blue eyes, but I almost want to see like maybe bounce light or something like that affecting him, or something like that. I want to see like a little bit more detail in there. And honestly, that can just come from the most subtle like bounce light, kind of underlighting some of the stuff going on in here. So add in a little bit of warmth of the light kind of bouncing off the chest area here, and start illuminating that. This is where we start to get kind of designy with our light. Like, it's not that important that the legs are lit. So let's just imagine that they're going into shadow and they're completely obscured. Now suddenly the skylight is kind of the only thing actually illuminating them. So let's just let them kind of fade into obscurity. Now they're less important compositionally, just by shifting those values and shifting where that light is. I'm always thinking kind of like a lighting designer when I'm doing paintings of, all right, is what's getting light something that should be getting light, or does it really need to get light? And even if it makes sense for it to be lit, is that the most important thing? See, by darkening these legs, suddenly we're starting to look up a little bit more, and rather than this beautifully painted leg, which is great, I think it's really well done, we start to look up a little bit more. And we also start to notice this kind of blue kind of light emanating from this thing. And that's a lot cooler. That's a lot more important than, again, the really cool feet, which are really nicely done, but also not really the point. I love this pool of golden light, and I'm almost tempted to keep it just because it's really well painted. So honestly, like, even though it's not super accurate, I don't care. I think it's pretty cool. You could always shift it a little bit more gray and have it kind of be like some pool of like skylight coming in. But yeah, I'm not too fussed on that. The other thing is your rocks. Your rocks are feeling a little too repetitive. I think it's a case of maybe a bit more referenced, but like these rocks in particular are just too the same size, and just you want a little bit more variety than that. And some of that comes from just time spent rendering. Like, these are very quickly painted. and their shapes aren't really telling us a lot. Like, part of it almost seems like they're part of a structure. So if you want to do that, maybe have them be a little bit more structural, a little bit more shaped stone look. Or if they're a natural formation, I think lean into that a little bit, because you've got this weird chasm thing. And is this something that's new or something that's old? Is this something that opened up and tore apart a structure that was there? Or, is it emerging from it? Start to think about like kind of how this stuff formed and why it formed. And I think you'll have a little bit more success with that stuff. Because right now the rocks are feeling a little, yeah, meh. I do like the ones like kind of here in this foreground area, and even here. I think these are quite nicely done. I think it's just the rest that are feeling a little bit rushed. I like the indication of all the figures. I think those are working quite nicely. I'd like to see a little bit more maybe design or something of the foreground figure. I feel like he's not interesting enough. He's a dude in kind of nondescript pants and nondescript baggy shirt. And I think we're at a point where I think we want to use him as a storytelling tool. So whether you want to make him have an interesting costume, whether you want to make it clear that it's, say, like a really modern costume of he's wearing modern jeans and modern t-shirt, or whether you want to go some other direction, make him ancient as well, whatever it happens to be, I want to use him as kind of that clear point, because most of these other figures are getting too far away for us to see at a casual glance. So use this front focal point figure as kind of the jumping off point to start telling a more clear story here. Yeah, I think that's about it. So just some random stuff with like lighting and stuff. But overall, I really like this. I think the sky is really well done. I assume it's partially photo bash. If it's not, that's really nicely done. Actually, I see a lot of brushwork. So maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually all painted up there, in which case it's really nicely done. If it was me, I would probably photo bash it a fair bit. But yeah, overall, just really nice. Good, solid perspective. Good sense of scale on things. Yeah, really, really cool. I like it a lot. So yeah, hope that stuff helps. All right. So this is cool. I will say right off the bat, I really like this guy back here. I think he's really cool. And because I like him so much, I want it to be more obvious that he's there. Because all this other stuff, while cool, seems to be detracting from him. So first off, like this whole city thing here, I don't think is that important. So yeah, I think one of the main things I've seen with your work is that it would really help for you to have a more clear idea of what the thumbnail read of your images is. Like how does it work as a thumbnail? If you have to take everything away, like what's the main read? How does it read? What's dark? What's light? Et cetera, et cetera. Defining clear foreground, background, midground, and making sure that those value shapes are staying consistent with whatever you decide early on. So first of all, let's try to just quickly get some depth in here and start to kind of reduce some of the various contrast going on here, because I feel like there's just a bit too much in too many places, which is part of what's throwing us off here. So I want it very clear that he's back here. So I want to use clear values, clear value shapes, and start to make him really obvious. And that makes everything else subservient to him. So like these foreground things suddenly are not quite as important as what's happening back there. Same even goes for these light sources. Like, yes, they're a light source, so they're going to need to be bright, but even those you can kind of tone down. They don't need to be quite as important as sort of what we're doing there. I think one of the other thing, kind of a general suggestion that has come up before, and I think could help you, is that you zoom in way too much. Like you get really intensely like sharp and really intense on tiny, tiny details. Like you're painting like individual like windows and stuff like that are back in there. And then you've got these huge swaths of mountains that aren't super tight, super detailed. And I think something that might help you balance out those two things is actually switching the brushes you use to more textural brushes. It feels like you're probably using a pretty hard, smooth brush for the most part, and that might be part of the problem. So I would say try staying zoomed out for one thing, and then using a more textural brush to imply more detail rather than actually painting those details. Rather than zooming in and painting them, try to see what you can do with a textural brush and while staying zoomed out. Think more like the kind of matte painter's approach to these things, where you're trying to do implied detail rather than painted detail, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think actually a more textural brush is going to help you out, because textural brushes are great because they imply a lot of detail without a lot of work. You can do it, and I've done it with just like a hard round brush, and it works fine. It's just it can be a little bit harder and a little more obvious that you're not painting the details. Whereas texture brushes kind of do a lot of the work for you, and then suddenly you don't have to paint all of those details back there, and then things can kind of sit where they're supposed to. So by obliterating kind of a lot of your detail work, keeping your value range super tight back here, using some texture, and then adding in some more shapes, suddenly we start to get this city kind of sitting more back where it's supposed to sit. It's kind of existing more back in the space that it should, which I think would be a really important thing to get in there. So yeah, bunch of random thoughts there, and there's some other stuff going on, but I think that's kind of the overall message, is trying to learn how to simplify. I would really suggest trying to see what it would be like to finish a piece staying zoomed out the whole time and not getting a super tiny brush. You're allowed to have a pretty small brush, but not a really tiny brush. You can do an amazing amount of stuff with a much larger brush, and then relying more on texture and just good fundamentals, rather than getting really, really zoomed in and doing like really, really tight rim light around things. And I think you'll come up with a much better result by doing that sort of stuff. And I think it would probably be best, just for the sake of practice, to probably just do some studies and use that technique of just larger brushes and larger brushwork, and just get used to that feeling of you can't paint everything. And that's a fundamental aspect of art in general, especially landscape work, is you can't paint everything. So you have to actually leave a lot to the viewer's imagination and let the viewer's eye actually fill in a lot of those details. Even if you look at great masterworks and stuff of Hudson River School painters that they painted tons of stuff, still at the end of the day they're using brushstrokes, and there's a lot of stuff that's implied. There's a lot of texture they're using. There's a lot of just they're using the fact that the paint texture is going to give them some stuff, the canvas texture is going to give them some stuff. They're not actually painting photographic reality everywhere. They leave a lot that kind of gets filled in as you step away from the piece. So that's something that I would really encourage you quite strongly to consider for the future. So yeah, so all that to say, cool piece. I like it. You've got some cool stuff going on here, but I really hope. Question, what would you suggest the lighting be in this piece? I'm not sure, because you haven't made it super clear where that lighting is coming from. Like you've got some light here that is sort of this light pool here. Whereas over here, we've got sort of an aurora cool light effect going on. So I'm not sure. You've got a few options here. Like if it was me, I would stick to probably this aurora lighting going on back here, because right now this guy back here is working quite nicely. And I'd like to see maybe bring in some of that cool lighting into some other areas. And yeah, use that as your fundamental light source for everywhere. But that's kind of one of those things to answer right off the bat. As soon as you're getting into your first value thumbnails and stuff, you should be figuring out where that lighting's coming from and how it works and how that's going to structure your entire piece from there. So yeah, hopefully that helps. And yeah, good stuff. All right, very cool. I like this a lot. I like this giant tentacle hair lady octopus something. I don't know. Cthulhu. It's got a few different things going on here. But yeah, really cool. I think the first thing is I immediately look at this and I don't get the scale. That's the problem right there, is I'm actually not seeing the scale. I only got the scale once I saw this dude. So let's see if we can figure out how that works. Because right now it kind of looks like the piece is just kind of a normal sized figure painting. I don't get the sense that this person is gigantic, and I really want to do that. So there's a few different ways you can do that. So the most obvious one is like starting to adjust the camera angle. So maybe we're closer to this guy's height and you're looking up at this figure. And that's obviously going to require repainting the whole figure. And so let's try to find some ways that don't require you to repaint the whole figure. And so the first one I'm actually going to do is start to add some more figures here to the foreground to kind of get some depth in here. That's going to be one of the things that we really want to do, is start to get depth. And so I'm going to add some really, really poorly painted silhouettes of some additional figures here in the foreground. And there's obviously multiple solutions to every art problem conceivable. But I'm just going to kind of give you one just to show the advantages and show at least the principle of these things. The other thing is I want to do maybe a little bit more depth to this thing. So rather than having it how you had it, I'm actually just because we're adding these other figures and stuff, I'm going to try to add a little bit more space here for them to kind of stand on and exist on and stuff like that. Maybe even adding a couple more platforms here. Again, trying to find ways to kind of repeat things. So if we're repeating this here and here, so we start to add some repeated figures kind of going farther away from us, then we start to get a sense of, okay, this is the same thing repeated back there. And that's the same principle we talked about in the other piece with the giant, of repeating those rock ledges, and it gives us a notable thing that's being repeated back that we can start to see clear evidence of. The other thing I might do is actually repeat some of these torches, because we've started to establish that these torches are here in this foreground, and maybe even give this guy a torch or something. So then we start to have these specks of light happening. And so maybe we even start adding in some like fires or something back here, maybe some like braziers and whatever. And we start to get this sense of like speckles of light. Not sure, but it's at least an idea. Oh, quick tangent question. Diego, he's asking if there's a way to get a Richard Schmid ebook, legal way. The price of the physical book is insane. Totally agree. It's very expensive, which is always a shame because it's incredible. Yeah. So it's a bummer. I don't think there is any way to get an ebook version of it, which is really sad, because I honestly do think it's one of the best painting books that exists. I'm actually rereading it right now. It's phenomenal. He's just incredibly good and incredibly good at explaining everything. So yeah, I would maybe try splitting the purchase with somebody else or something like that. Share it. Find a copy in your library if you can. That's something some people can do. Is you can actually ask your library to purchase a copy of it, and that might be a way to get it. But yeah, sadly, I don't really know of any solution. I remember when I bought it, I was a student, had barely any money, and it felt like so much, and it felt like a ridiculous expense to buy it. But I am so glad that I did, because it's just extremely good. It's a lot of art education packed into a book. So I would encourage you to try to find some way to get it. Yeah. So let's see here. Let's see some other stuff I can do. I also think about like maybe fading off some of the light here. I like kind of what you're doing with pooling some of the light, and I almost want to do that even more than you've got. So let's let some of this actually fade off into darkness down here. So another big thing on scale has to do actually with rendering and how we render and the size of the details we're kind of getting into. And so this is going to be a case of if you start adding in certain brushstrokes and contrast that imply this thing is really huge and has lots of intricate detail in it and stuff, it's going to feel bigger. So that's another thing we might try to play with here is starting to increase the level of detail and rendering and the kind of tiny scale of details that's going to be back there. If you try to use large brushstrokes for things that are really far in the distance, it can often make them feel a little bit out of place. So that might be something to try out. The face is a little bit flat. I'm guessing from changing from the reference you used, it started to flatten out a bit, and that might be something to look at. It probably gets a little bit more obvious for you once you flip it, but I don't really get a clear sense of the features and forms. Part of it is some of the features have gotten too small. Even if you can accept that, sure, things are a little bit different. It's like a mythical creature and stuff like that. It feels just a little bit out of place. Yeah. And then thinking about, all right, how can we do the silhouette here to really show off the forms? Because that's going to be a big thing for portraits, is making sure that you really establish this side plane and the front plane and make sure that lighting is working really well for you. And then you're going to get some really nice bounce light here. And that's what's going to play up the sense of light that you've developed here. So if you start to underlight everything so that you're getting that bounce light. So just kind of look up some reference and find out where that bounce light tends to hit. And then you'll start to have a better sense of this stuff. You might also switch to maybe using some cooler tones to model the top light of this head. That way you get a more obvious, warm, underlit look to these things. So yeah, just adding in a little bit of cool light here. And already that starts to get a little bit more depth. It's not quite perfect, but it at least starts to get there. All right. The other thing I might consider is reducing the contrast of a lot of stuff in the background. So starting to introduce a little bit more atmospheric perspective going on. So I'm actually going to darken some of the lights back here, because aside from really intense like snow and other white reflective objects, even lights will get a little bit less contrasty as they recede away from us. So I'm going to reduce a bunch of this and make it seem a bit farther away. And I'm going to add a bit of kind of bloom here from the torches. Like when in doubt, just make it a really misty room. Like there's a reason, like you check out films and there's a reason they have so much atmosphere when they're shooting these scenes. And it's because it really adds that sense of depth and clarity to a scene to have that atmosphere. So, and we as painters get to really, really play that stuff up and really intensify those feelings of atmosphere. Just go look at like any 3D animated movie and you will see just how like designed everything is. And that should be the kind of stuff you're looking at for as far as like how to stage these scenes such that they look the way you want them to. So starting to push this back, it's still not quite getting the sense of scale that I think we want to get here, but we're going to get there. I might also do a couple things. So I'm going to chisel into the form here to maybe get a better sense of, if not looking up at her, at least not looking down. I think that would be its own kind of helpful thing. Because obviously if you're looking down at it, it's going to make it seem a lot smaller. So yeah. And then let's see here. I want to actually throw a lot more of this into shadow. And then I'm going to introduce some contrast here in the foreground so that the light back there doesn't seem quite so out of place. So this is a tricky one to get depth on, but we can get there. Another thing I might look at for something like this, if you're trying to paint some giant lady, is look at the movie Moana and look at how they painted the giant lady in there and how they made her seem giant. Think about whatever cues they used, the lighting cues, the detail cues, the context of what's around her. Because part of the reason this is hard to read as huge is the fact that we don't have a lot nearby her that is something relatable. So we don't really know anything nearby. Like if there was a dude standing over here and we could tell that he's really tiny, all of a sudden we get an easier time telling that. So these foreground guys definitely help, but just trying to think of any way we can to start adding stuff like that. I'm going to bring her shoulder up again, so kind of play up anything we can to kind of tweak that sense of perspective. So by seeing that shoulder kind of coming up above the collarbone, that's going to increase that effect that we're looking kind of a little bit more up at her. So yeah. Let's see how we're doing. Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I feel a bit better about where I've taken this. I think it's pretty good. And now that we've kind of pushed a few things back here, this is when I might reintroduce some lights. So this is when we get to start like adding in a little bit more contrast to a places. And then I do the same for some of the tentacles and stuff. Add in a little bit of shine and detail there. And this is, again, the time where you want to imply the scale of these things. So with like implied brushwork and the size of details and texture and stuff, we want to start getting the sense of how big these things are. And again, you can also add a little bit of, say, underlighting from like torches and stuff like that. All in the effort to get a little bit more scale. All right. Yeah, I know I'm going a little bit farther with this one, but I think it's a kind of a good example of how to increase depth and scale in a piece. Yeah. So, yeah. But again, I really like this piece. I think it's really cool. I think you did a great job on it. I love the pose. Love how the figure's painted. I think it just needs a little bit of tweaking to get that scale quite right, which I know it can be hard to do when you're working from reference and trying to like increase the scale of something. Yeah, scale is something that I found fascinating, especially early on in my art career. I just wanted to make everything epic, and so I did a lot of looking at paintings that were doing it really well and trying to just pick apart, like, okay, what is it exactly that's making this thing look gigantic and epic? And that would be a good thing to check out, is just look at the concept art and the illustrations that do a really phenomenal job of portraying this epic scale, and you'll start to see all these tricks of adding depth, adding atmosphere, implying a lot of detail, and seeing how all these things work together to create these really epic pieces. So just a few thoughts on that. But yeah, so I think that's all of the pieces. So I'm going to turn off all my paintovers real quick and take another quick look at these. First of all, I'll just say you all did a great job. I really like all of the different directions you went with this. I think ancient was a sweet theme, and you're bound to come up with something cool. And I love just seeing all the different takes on what that generated. So really nicely done. Yeah. So as far as the winner, I think I'm going to have to give it to Sam here, Sampo. Yeah, really nicely done. This one was sweet to see come together. Really nicely done. I love the stuff going on, especially like these tree branches you got going on here. Really nice, great depth, good color. Love the design of this creepy tree thing with hands. It's just really disturbing and weird, and I love it. And I love just the scale of it. Of you've got figures in here, you've got a city in here, you've got this giant tree thing, you've got some beautifully painted clouds back here. Like, you went kind of all out on this, and I think it really shows. I think it's really nicely done, and yeah, you should be proud. But again, great job to everybody. Y'all did great. This was awesome to see. I'm excited to do another one at some point. And yeah, so if you're interested in joining my Discord, the link should be in the description below. I'll be doing the challenges like this from time to time. We've got nice prizes and stuff for winning, and also a good chance to just kind of do some paintovers and learn how to do better paintings. So hopefully this helped out all of you guys. Hopefully you picked up some tricks and stuff like that. I'll go ahead and post all the paintovers into the Discord so that you can get a closer look at these. And if you've got any more questions, let me know in the Discord, and I can try to clarify anything I might have said here. I know sometimes on a stream it's a little hard to keep track of things. So yeah, so great work. You guys did awesome. I'm really proud. And yeah, So I'll see you in the Discord, and I will hopefully be back to doing some streaming sometime soon. I've been doing a lot of figure painting studies lately, and so I'm kind of back into a zone of I almost kind of sort of know what I'm doing. I went off into a lot of other things for a while there of trying to learn and brush up on skills that I was struggling with, and now I'm back to a place of I feel like I'm producing work that I'm fairly proud of. So I think that would be kind of fun to show off in a stream sometime. So I'll try to do that sometime soon. So thanks again. You guys are great, and I will see you next time. Take care.